So welcome to episode 5 of the Men We Are podcast, and this episode is going to look at the stories we tell ourselves about our lives. And there's a quiet realization that changes everything, and most men reach that realization without noticing. And I do need you to stick with me because it's a bit philosophical in its nature. We don't tend to suffer most from what happened to us because as men, we seem to find a way to accept it, cope with it. You know, we use the premise, it is what it is. What we actually suffer from is the stories we tell ourselves about what happened, you know, like looking back in hindsight, the meaning we attach to it, the conclusions we draw, the identity we built around it, those sorts of things. And the reality becomes quite heavy. So the narrative we carry determines whether that weight, the weight of the reality crushes us or becomes something we're able to carry. So at some point, usually during stress, you know, disappointment, even exhaustion, we start to become storytellers. And it's not the story we tell other people, because as men, we tend to be quite guarded about opening up anyway. Certainly I do. And that's to our detriment. And the reason it's to our detriment, if we were to tell the story to other people, we might get another perspective, and that might actually change our conclusion. But what we do, we take fragments of our lives and assemble them into something coherent, something that we, like, you know, we feel capably explains how we're feeling now. And it tends to have a beginning, an event, a middle, the kind of what happened, and then a reason off the basis of that. And once a story settles in, we just stop questioning it. And it stops feeling like a story, and it actually starts to feel like the truth. And I'm sure, we all know someone that has bragged about something that started off as a kind of small exaggeration. You know, something like they played for a Premiership academy as a teenager. But over the time, the truth morphs gently and the details begin to get embellished and mismatched until they're telling you the story as if they were on the cusp of signing pro. And the details themselves cloud over time until they have a version that they've told so many times, even they believe it. And it becomes the truth, even though it's not. It's so inaccurate. And that's what we're doing every day with our own lives. So I want to talk today about some of the most common stories men tell themselves, and they're stories that don't come from arrogance or self-pity. It's just we're trying to make sense of sacrifices we've made, and they're stories that feel honest, but they keep us stuck. So starting off with one of the most common stories I've experienced myself, and in sort of moments like those low moments of disappointment, I've heard it from other people as well, and it's I sacrificed everything. And it's got to be one of the heaviest things men carry. And it usually comes from real effort, like real responsibility, and you know you did the right thing, but you still feel something of a burden because you showed up. You know, you stayed, you put others first above yourself. And somewhere along the way, like your own wants, they kind of became negotiable. Or even worse, they weren't even up for negotiation. The things that you wanted, the things that you felt you needed, they're gone and they're just consigned to the memory bank. So the danger of this story isn't that it's false, because I'm afraid to say it definitely can be true for many of us that we did sacrifice huge amounts. I think the problem is that it's, what's the word? It's totalizing. Yeah, it feels just so final, and it makes the story feel like it's been chiseled into stone, and therefore there's no wiggle room. So I sacrificed everything just leaves no room for choice, and it turns your life into something that's happened to you instead of something you participated in. And I wonder if some of you ever, you know, got lost in that idea, lost in the idea that you're waiting for your life to start, you're waiting for your life to get going, because you've made the sacrifices So the good stuff has to be on the way. So a truer version might actually be, I made sacrifices that matters and they cost me something. But that cost also came with a reward. And it's rather than just making this statement, I sacrificed everything and leaving it there. You're saying I sacrificed things that matters and that had a cost. So you're acknowledging it. It doesn't erase your effort, and it might also help you to find a bit of clarity with your current situation. So you appreciate the now and gain a little more consciousness. So another story is everyone else got more than me. It's envy or jealousy. Obviously, those two words aren't quite interchangeable, but you know they're very closely related. And this story is purely born from comparison. And the times we live in, comparison like that is almost unavoidable. We see other men's highlights, their success, freedom, how confident they are. It's all brightly coloured. It's been run through a filter. It's like a fucking neon light saying, look at me. And as a result, we quietly can conclude to ourselves that they got the life we were supposed to have. But comparison rarely tells the whole story, because you're just seeing the outcomes. You're not seeing the trade-offs. You're just seeing the end result and not the cost of it. So unless you implicitly know that person, you don't 100% know how they got to that point. And even then, even if you do know that person, you still don't know if it's completely truthful, because behind the curtain, it could be an absolute shit show. A better version might sound like other men made different choices and paid different prices. So that doesn't mean you were cheated. It means there was never one version of a good life. And you honestly, you don't know what's going through that person's head. For all you know, with their Ferrari and their Rolex and their holidays and all of those things that you've placed the emphasis and value on, they might be looking at your life and it makes them miserable because they're comparing what they have to what you do. You just don't know. And I'm not 100% sure if he came up with it or it was just popularized, but the US president from years and years ago, Theodore Roosevelt, he once said comparison is the thief of joy. I think that's a wonderful, wonderul saying. Comparison is the thief of joy. Just think about that. It's, like if you're forever comparing yourself, you don't realize just how lucky you are with the things you already have. So the final story we tell ourselves is, I missed my chance. And I suppose it's appropriate I left that one till last because this one feels a bit more final and it carries a sense of, time. Time is closing in because we feel our opportunities are diminishing as time goes on. And this story often forms, this narrative starts to get told to ourselves when the energy's dropping, responsibilities are increasing, and the future is certainly narrowing and it doesn't feel as wide open. So when you're in my age bracket, in your 40s, as a man, my body isn't as capable anymore. I have more responsibility with a household to manage. I can't just do the things I want anymore. And I'm not for a second suggesting the things I want are to just go backpacking for 6 months and forget about my life. But as a commercial pilot, I love my job. I feel so lucky to have the job that I do. But I would love to have taken a sabbatical at some point in my career and gone somewhere like Papua New Guinea and just flown light aircraft, like 10-seaters, into these communities, doing really important humanitarian work, connecting communities that would otherwise be isolated. But no matter how noble I think that might be, that sabbatical, that time over in another country helping people would be, is also selfish, because I have responsibilities at home. So it doesn't even get into the maybe column. That opportunity's gone. So I missed my chance. Yes, I could think about it that way. But I missed my chance assumes that something is assuming something that's not true. That life only offers one window or one opportunity for meaning. So a truer version of that might actually be like the season I imagined has passed, but now I'm in a different season. And it doesn't deny loss. You know, like you're accepting of the fact that something has been and gone, but it refuses to turn that loss into a life sentence. So the key point is that, you know, stories feel factual because they were written during emotional moments and moments of fatigue or grief, these moments of narrowing options. So how are we supposed to revise the story without lying to ourselves and just telling us a load of nonsense? And certainly, how do we avoid that getting caught out saying everything's fine? I think the important thing, it's about telling a truer story. It's not a nicer story. It's a truer one. So we have to separate events from interpretation. We have to come to terms with the fact what happened. It's real. And we have to remember what actually happened, the actual events. And the story we've been telling ourselves might have clouded those facts. We really have to think what actually happened. And that gives the meaning more flexibility, because you can acknowledge the fact I didn't get the life I imagined, even if it feels shitty. And you don't have to conclude, therefore, my life is a failure. So I'll say that again. Your life isn't a failure just because you didn't get the life that you imagined. It's not the case at all. So we have to find a way to allow that story to evolve almost. And many men living these narratives written 10, 20 years ago, you know, there's a fair chance the narrative's out of date. And they were created by younger versions of ourselves who didn't know or just couldn't comprehend what the journey would demand. Excuse me. So you have to get out of the mindset that updating your story is a betrayal. It's honestly, it's just maturity. So the less mature versions of ourselves that were sad about something, but failed to grieve, they were the ones that allowed the resentment to settle in and take up residence. And we've established that resentment thrives on rigid stories. So if we can make the story a little bit more compassionate and certainly more informed about the situation as it really was, that grief softens and the resentment has less to feed off. So what that means to me is the things I didn't like or perhaps feel like I lost were a part of my story. And therefore, rewriting the entire story isn't the way to progress. Instead, I have to rewrite the explanation. Rewriting the explanation helped more, because I wasn't fixated on like what actually happened, but more the why it happened. And for me, that changed the tone from accusation to understanding. And that open honesty of the truth, it genuinely felt less judgmental and it's less heavy. And we all know we are our worst judges. We judge ourselves the harshest. So when the story softens, something else becomes visible, and you start to get more clarity and start to notice where you actually are now. And that's not where you're supposed to be, not some made up fantasy, and also not where you thought you'd end up. It's where your life is unfolding right now. And then what happens is you start getting to the point where you stop fighting the past and realize how distant it is from the present, like how distant you as a person are from the past. And you might realize you got pulled away by responsibility, your obligations, just the pressure to keep things moving forward. And we talked about that in another episode, that, like, you know, societal norms told us that you should be moving forward, and if you're not moving forward, you're stagnating. But as we said in episode 2 of the series, the first one about missing out or outgrowing things, we can reframe our lives so we positively see ourselves as showing up consistently even, is a product of like, it's you might not feel like you're moving forward, but you're consistent and you're not stagnating, even if you don't feel like things are changing. So many of the stories that we tell ourselves it shouldn't be about failure or regret. It can be about distance. And just think for a second, like, what sort of things do we find ourselves becoming distant from? I can only give my thoughts and my experiences, but like, we can feel ourselves becoming distant from the people we love, distant from our own body as we get older and it becomes less capable. I certainly am contending with that at the moment. But whatever gives you that feeling of vacancy, it can leave you feeling distant from the moment you're standing in right now. And that's a shame. And as with everything else, like, we have to have cause. That's what makes us men. So we justify that distance with good reasons. I'm doing this for my family, or it's just a busy time right now, and I'll get my stuff later. But later has a cheeky way of just never showing up. So the mission is to find a way to improve the story we tell ourselves, so that the person we're sharing with the world is more whole. And as with any complex issue, when we stop narrating ourselves as broken or behind, we're left with a more uncomfortable question. And it's like, am I actually here now living the life I'm actually living? And obviously I mean that emotionally, as we're clearly there physically, if we're thinking about it. But there is a huge amount we can go into on consciousness on that very subject. But that's for another day, and it's a way down the road. But are we actually like here for the life you're living right now? And that conscious presence is important, because it's impossible to make peace with your past and still be absent from your present. You have to be there. And off the back of that, if the stories we tell ourselves shape how we see our lives, the next question for the next episode is about how we actually inhabit and occupy those lives fully. So how do we as men stay present when life keeps pulling us away from a bit of me time, through work, travel, our responsibilities, just the constant demand to be useful as opposed to available. So that's where we're gonna go next in the next episode. We're going to look at staying present when life is pulling you away, because I want to look at how having some healthy distance isn't always abandonment. It's the being there without actually physically needing to be there sometimes. And if presence is like the work of the now, what's growth actually going to look like at this stage of life? So I really look forward to continuing the journey. Hopefully you're finding some of this helpful. And as ever, if you are finding this a help to you, it's opening up some mental pathways. Please do download, subscribe, anything that's going to popularize the podcast, so that, if it's helping you, hopefully it can help other people, because it's helping me. I feel like I'm making progress with my own stuff just by thinking things through in a bit more detail. So hopefully it will help you, and I look forward to having you on the next episode. So until then, good luck.